Spellforce Conquest of EO has just launched on console for around $30 USD, and you're probably wondering, is it worth playing? Some of you may already be familiar with the Spellforce series, or you may have even just watched my Spellforce 3 video, and thank you for everyone who's watched it. If you've seen my video, which should also be on your screen right now, you would know that I praise Spellforce 3 for being a refreshing mix of different genres. But if you enjoyed Spellforce 3, it doesn't mean you'll automatically enjoy Conquest of EO, because it is not an RTS/RPG. It's its own complete different type of game that merges elements of a turn-based 4X that forgoes diplomacy and empire management and instead focuses on the story and some RPG mechanics. So, if you're interested in seeing what Spellforce Conquest of EO is, the positives, the howevers, or just my overall thoughts, then feel free to jump to the timestamps below. Otherwise, let's get into what the game is. As you can see, Spellforce Conquest of EO has a campaign map and a smaller tactical map for battles. You can immediately see how it can be compared to 4X games like Civilization, Age of Wonders, or even Endless Legend. But like I mentioned before, the game takes a different approach to the 4X genre. It is still an open world game where you can go wherever you want. However, your aim is not just to take out the enemy antagonist. Your goal is to finish the story mission, and how you do this is up to you. But you will need to complete certain objectives, and this is one of the major points of difference for Conquest of EO. It has a major focus on completing missions. Even the small little villages on the map will give you missions that allow you to gain resources from them, and the major cities have faction reputation and missions that you'll need to complete to unlock better types of troops and special buildings. A lot of the gameplay focuses around completing objectives as you move around the map. And this is the other big point of difference when it comes to Conquest of EO, because the game isn't about empire or city management. You start off the game with a wizard tower that you can only build a limited amount of buildings in predefined slots. And similar to games like Civilization, that tower has a territory radius around it that gives you control of the resources and buildings around it. While you cannot build or take over any other towers or cities, you will slowly unlock up to 5 apprentices, who are like army commanders who can build a domain anywhere on the map. Think of domains as outposts that you can place down anywhere to get resources or gain access to special buildings from different locations. So this means Conquest of EO is a game that focuses on only managing one city. However, a major part of the story revolves around you needing to move your wizard tower around the map. Now, add in the fact that the game does not have an in-depth empire management or diplomacy system and has enemies that scale with you, it forces the player to be constantly moving towards objectives. And this reinforces Conquest of EO as a more fast-paced, story-driven approach to the genre. So when it comes to gameplay, the game has a variety of systems, including 3 different classes and a custom-made class to choose from. It also has a glyph/mod system to power up your troops. It has potions to give you an advantage in combat, and instead of researching technology, you'll be researching powerful spells that are broken up to different types of magic. They can help you in combat, spawn different types of troops, even some spells that help you in the campaign map. Speaking of combat, the game has turn-based battles similar to games like Age of Wonders, Humankind, or even Fire Emblem Three Houses. This means when your army goes into battle, it zooms the map into a tactical layer. On this map, each unit will get a certain amount of action points each turn. One unique aspect of combat is the retaliation system, where if a unit is attacked multiple times by the enemy in a turn, that unit can end up losing its turn. The game also has auto-resolve battles, however, you can't use them for certain major fights. Also, your units will gain experience and level up in battle. As part of this, they will unlock perks that you can choose from. This means that troops surviving battles is extremely important, as you don't want to lose experienced units with a pile of upgrades. To keep combat engaging, the game does have a range of different unique troops with abilities. And as someone who's played Spellforce 3, it was nice to see some familiar units. Overall, combat felt like a game you've probably played before, and the enjoyment will probably heavily depend on how you feel about turn-based combat. And finally, the game does not have multiplayer, it only has a campaign that has a range of different difficulties and starting locations that you can choose from. So, let's get into the positives. One of the biggest positives of Conquest of EO is its unique take on the 4X strategy genre. The game has a giant campaign map focused on you moving around the game world, and has a more story-focused approach to the genre. This creates an experience I've rarely played before. For better or worse, by mixing different types of games, it makes Conquest of EO feel like its own unique experience. The ability to move your base and complete missions gives Conquest of EO a more linear focus than most 4X games. While a lot of fans may dislike these types of restrictions on a sandbox, it means you always know exactly what you're working towards. When talking about Conquest of EO on console, it has to be commended how smoothly the controls work. I rarely had any issues, other than certain button layout choices not being immediately intuitive, like the A and X button at times being used to confirm certain commands. However, this wasn't a major issue, and that quickly became second nature. Without needing to focus on empire management and micromanaging cities, it created an experience that felt at times streamlined for controllers. Also, while at this stage I've played around 20 to 30 hours, I haven't run into any major performance issues. I did run into one minor bug, like a unit being stuck on a mountain because the game built a non-flying unit into a flying unit. However, I never had any major issues. Overall, because of the turn-based setting, the game worked well on console. One of the major positives of the game was the overall setting and world. The world map feels alive with different fantasy factions and towns, like the elves and the orcs. Also, the wandering NPC mobs meant you couldn't travel far without running into something you can do. On top of that, there always seemed to be a town with a quest or a valuable resource around every corner. The game's map design and constant objectives created a game where it can easily turn into just one more turn. And that really summarizes what Conquest of EO has to offer. And while it had restrictions on a lot of different aspects of a 4X game, I found that Conquest of EO still provided multiple different mechanics and systems that kept the player engaged. The game gets to a point where it feels like just one more turn to unlock that city's reputation so I can get that unique unit. Or just one more turn, I can unlock this spell to help me win a battle. Or just one more turn, I can build that building in my base. When it comes to that sense of constant progression and that 4X hook, Conquest of EO definitely keeps the player constantly busy and working towards a goal. The game does have dozens, if not hundreds of hours of replayability, but that's depending on how you feel about the game's overall content. And by this I mean, the game may not be sandboxed enough for some players. And this leads me to, however. First and foremost, when discussing the long-term replayability of Conquest of EO, its decision to provide less focus on certain sandbox aspects of the game may be an issue for some players. The two major areas that some players may find do not have enough depth are the diplomacy and the empire management sections. It would have been good to see a more in-depth diplomacy system, especially when dealing with the other NPC antagonists and major cities. This would have added more replayability as you could have decided to work with or against certain factions. And while the game does have a reputation system that rewards the player for engaging with it, it did feel very limited. Another major, however, for some players can be the lack of in-depth city and empire management systems that take away from the open world sandbox feeling where every game can feel completely different. That's not to say it doesn't have replayability, however, that will depend on what you enjoy most out of a 4X game. For players who want more from an open world than just random NPC attacks, then Conquest of EO can start to feel repetitive later into the game, especially when it comes to battles and the lack of different environments. But one major area that may impact longevity for some players is the game's pacing. By not having in-depth diplomacy, having enemies that scale, and having missions that require you to move your base around the map, means Conquest of EO is a game that pushes the player to constantly be moving and progressing. It does not provide a lot of opportunities to build giant defenses or turtle up your empire. The game really is not for defensive players, as you need to be constantly moving around the map, leveling up your heroes and units. This can be mitigated a little bit by your choice of difficulty. So just be aware that the pacing of the game can be a positive or a negative depending on how you enjoy playing. Finally, one of the major however's of Conquest of EO is its tutorials and lack of voice acting. The game does have tutorial windows with written prompts, however I still found myself learning new mechanics and how they worked every time I restarted. While the game does have a lower price, it still would have been nice to have more detailed voice tutorials and main missions. Overall, some players may not enjoy how Spellforce Conquest of EO forces them to constantly play a more aggressive style of gameplay, or the game's lack of an in-depth empire management and diplomacy. However, the game's not trying to be a traditional 4X game. Because of this, I suspect that how much you will enjoy Spellforce Conquest of EO will depend on how much you value the different parts of the 4X genre. For players who enjoy a unique experience with a story focus, solid turn-based combat, and prefer a bigger emphasis on moving around the map, then this game has a lot to offer. So if you're looking for a different type of game with its own unique perspective, and also has a lower release price, then Spellforce Conquest of EO may be the game for you. Thank you for listening and please subscribe.